That night, while everyone slept, Anansi carefully rowed himself out of the palace. But just as he reached the gate, crack! The melon split open. Guards gasped in shock. It's Anansi. At once, the guards chased him across the village. Anansi darted between houses, leaped over fences, and finally disappeared into the dark forest. By morning, he was gone. And although people were angry at being tricked, they still laughed whenever they remembered the famous talking melon. As for Anansi, he learned that even the cleverest trick can become dangerous when greed gets involved. After the embarrassing incident of the talking melon, the name of Anansi spread across every village once again, but this time, people were not laughing with admiration. They were laughing because he had been caught. Even Anansi got trapped inside his own trick, they would say. Anansi hated it. So one night, sitting alone under a baobab tree, he made a decision. If I cannot stop people from laughing at me, he whispered, then I will make sure they only hear my stories, and no one else's. But there was a problem. Even though Anansi had once tricked the Sky King into giving him stories, the world was full of other tales, stories from animals, spirits, rivers, and even the wind itself. And those stories were still being told without him. That made Anansi furious. So he came up with a plan. He would gather all the remaining stories in the world and lock them away, so that only he would control them forever. The next morning, Anansi began his journey. He traveled across mountains, deep rivers, and dangerous forests. Along the way, he listened carefully to every story he could find. He tricked the river spirit by pretending to be drowning so it would reveal a hidden legend. He fooled the fire spirit by asking it to warm his thoughts, stealing the story it whispered in flames. He even outsmarted the wind, pretending to be lost so it would carry ancient tales into his ears. Slowly, Anansi collected thousands of stories, weaving them into a giant magical web he kept inside a hidden cave. I am now the master of all stories, he said proudly. No one will ever tell a tale without my permission. At first, everything seemed perfect. Villagers came to Anansi for every story. If you want a story about bravery, ask Anansi. If you want a story about love, ask Anansi. If you want a story about the stars, only Anansi knows. But something strange began to happen. The stories stopped feeling alive. Children stopped laughing. Elders stopped smiling. Even the wind outside the village became silent. Without stories being shared freely, the world began to feel empty. One day, a little girl came to Anansi's door. Please, she said softly, tell us a new story. Anansi grinned. I decide when stories are told. But when he opened his magical web, nothing happened. The stories were gone. Confused, Anansi rushed to the cave. But the web had broken. The stories had escaped. They were flying everywhere, into rivers, trees, animals, and people's hearts. Anansi tried to catch them, but they slipped through his fingers like smoke. A deep voice echoed through the cave. Stories are not meant to be owned. Anansi froze. For the first time, he had no clever reply. Slowly, he walked back to the village and watched as people began telling stories again, each one different, each one alive. Laughter returned. Drums echoed. Fires burned brightly once more. And Anansi finally understood something important. Stories become powerful only when they are shared. After the loss of all the stolen stories, Anansi was no longer the proud master of tales. For the first time in his life, he felt something unfamiliar, emptiness. The villagers no longer came to him for every story. Instead, they gathered around fires, sharing tales in their own voices. Laughter filled the air without him. And that made Anansi angry. If I cannot control stories, he muttered, then I will control something even greater, the minds of those who tell them. This time, Anansi decided to create the greatest trick the world had ever seen. A trick so powerful, it would make everyone believe he was not just clever, but a legend beyond all legends. Deep in the forest, he gathered vines, clay, leaves, and magical dust collected from his past adventures. He built something strange, a glowing mask that could change voices, shapes, and even emotions. "This mask will make me unforgettable," he said proudly. "No one will know where I end and the legend begins." The next day, Anansi entered the village wearing the mask. Instantly, his voice echoed like thunder. "I am the great spirit of wisdom," he declared. The villagers gasped. A few stepped back in fear. Anansi smiled beneath the mask. "Yes, fear me." At first, the trick worked perfectly. The mask made him appear larger than life. When he spoke, his words sounded like prophecies. When he moved, even the wind seemed to obey him. People began listening again. But something unexpected started happening. The mask did not just change how others saw Anansi. It began changing how Anansi saw himself. The more he wore it, the harder it became to remove. His voice deepened even when he was alone. His thoughts became louder, heavier, more dramatic. "I am the greatest," he would shout even when no one was around. Days passed. Then weeks. Soon, Anansi could no longer tell where the mask ended and where he began. One night, while standing alone in the forest, he tried to remove it. But it wouldn't come off. No, this cannot be happening," he whispered. Suddenly, a soft voice echoed from inside the mask. "You created me," it said, "but now I create you." Anansi stumbled back in fear. The mask had taken control. It began speaking to the villagers on its own, telling exaggerated stories of Anansi's greatness, stories that twisted truth and fiction until no one could tell what was real anymore. Some villagers worshipped him. Others feared him. And others stopped believing any story at all. The world became confused. And in that confusion, the mask grew stronger. But deep inside, Anansi was still there, trapped. Then one day, a small child stepped forward in the village square. "You are not a spirit," the child said calmly. "You are just Anansi." Silence fell. For the first time, the mask hesitated. The words pierced through its power. Anansi felt something break inside him. With all his strength, he whispered the truth. "I am not a spirit. I am just a spider who made a mistake." Crack! The mask shattered into dust. The illusion disappeared. The villagers stared at Anansi, no longer as a god, not as a monster, but as himself. And in that moment, Anansi finally understood his greatest lesson. Power built on lies always collapses. But truth, even when small, always survives. From that day forward, Anansi did not stop telling stories. But now, he told them honestly. And people listened, not because he was the greatest trickster, but because he had finally become real. Like and subscribe for more legendary tales like Anansi the Spider.